In your first film, Chasing Ice, you're doing a similar thing, only documenting the disintegration of glaciers. I wonder what you learned from that experience that you applied to this effort.
Well, thank you guys all for being here, first of all. Thank you so much. And thanks to my mom and dad, and my grandmother and my sister. The biggest thing I would say with Chasing Ice, what we learned from, in large part, James Baylog, the subject of that film, was his background was as a photographer, and for him, it was super critical to have a camera in the same exact position documenting the change over time, because then by being in the same exact spot, the brain isn't doing any extra work to try to figure out, oh, is that the same spot, or where is it? Or, you've seen images online of, take a look at this city 100 years later, and it takes you a while, you're like, that can't be the same spot. Like, is that from the same, oh, maybe that building's the same building. And so the absolute critical need to have that camera locked off as best as possible, so that, and to eliminate as many other distractions as you can as well, so that you're only paying attention to the thing that you're looking at. So in the time lapses, we are actually doing some post-production to blur the fish. You don't see the fish distinctly. They're still there and you can still feel them, but we tried to just sort of like, want you to know that they're there, but we don't want you staring at the fish, because when we just take the straight time lapse and speed it up, one's attention could easily be distracted by all those other things. So really trying to eliminate all those variables and keep it focused just on the core. The other really big thing I would say is when we started this project, I thought I knew everything there was to know about climate change. We had worked on glaciers, that was the story, but I didn't know how much the oceans were heating up. And that 93% statistic that's in the film about how much the oceans absorb the energy from climate change, that was the biggest wake-up call for me. And that's really, we're seeing the biggest changes right now in the ocean.
I'm curious, the portions of reefs that are still healthy, if that's a word to use, what accounts for their resilience while other portions are dying?
Sure. That's actually a pretty complicated question, in that there are a lot of different things affecting coral reefs and really hurting coral reefs. So the Gulf of the Gulf of Mexico, we've lost most of the corals there, mostly because of agricultural runoff. So just our farming practices, if you're not buying organic food, if the fertilizer that's coming off of those products, they flow down the Mississippi, and the entire Gulf of Mexico is pretty much dead as a result of agricultural runoff. So there are different problems in different areas. That said, with the bleaching specifically, the biggest problem with the bleaching is just its temperature, 100% temperature. There are all these other stressors that can affect the reef, but we're seeing a direct correlation with temperature. The places that survived are the places where the hot water didn't go. So if you just picture a heat map and it's summertime and the heat wave's coming in and you see it's going like down the south and it comes up the coast, that's pretty much where the coral, like that's that same exact analogy with the corals.
So there's a lot to be really depressed about in this subject, and a recent news cycle of the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement is even further reason for discouragement. I wonder, how you look at this and where you find your source of energy on this.
I find optimism from a couple of areas. One of which is that there's been such denial for such a long time, but in this ironic way, the planet is suffering so much right now, as we've captured and others have captured, such that it's becoming completely unignorable. Like, you can't deny it anymore. Like, it's getting to this phase where it's just beyond denial, and that will continue to get worse as the years come on. But the optimism for me comes from changes in technology and the youth. Like, youth get it. Youth just tend to know innately what's going on, how significant these issues are. The more and more it's taught, the more it's taught in schools, the more ubiquitous it is, and people are getting it now. But the other thing is that the solutions are also becoming so much more affordable. And clean energy is, if you're not on board that clean energy is the obvious future, then you're just going to miss a huge wave. Like this is the biggest financial opportunity. Whoever can invent the first carbon-free plane is going to make a lot of money. NASA and Boeing and now JetBlue are all involved in trying to race for hybrid planes, for fuel cell powered planes. The solar energy and the wind energy price points have dropped so dramatically over the last 5 years. That's really like the technological exponential growth that we're seeing is completely unprecedented in those fields. So we're going to be seeing major changes in our energy generation over the coming years. So between those things, I am very, very hopeful. I'm actually very optimistic that we will solve this problem. It is a matter of when, and it's a matter of how much human suffering will there be between now and then. But at a certain point, we will realize it. What happens when 1 billion people who depend on corals for their food and protein, what happens when they lose their main source of protein? This issue is going to dominate this century. This is the biggest issue humanity has ever had to deal with, barring like nuclear war, which would be the only other thing that is sort of on that par. So we need to be urgently taking action on this. We need to figure out how do we stop emitting carbon. We need to figure out how do we remove carbon from the atmosphere and bring it back down. And these are the big challenges of the coming decades. The question was about ocean acidity and acidification, which is a growing and growing threat. When we first started working on this project, we were debating, at first we thought we would have to make this as a comprehensive overview of all of these different issues affecting the oceans. You've got bleaching, acidification, you've got plastic, agricultural runoff, overfishing. There are communities that bomb the reefs with dynamite to catch their fish just because it's convenient, and it kills all the coral. Like, that's a real thing. And we were struggling with ocean acidity. In short, the carbon that we emit from our fossil fuel usage, et cetera, that carbon lands on the ocean surface. It gets absorbed, and it's just like your carbonated beverages, and it's acidic. And what that does, the unfortunate thing about that is that it can actually kill the functioning of small shells. It prevents certain types of ocean creatures from actually creating their shells, and it's effectively dissolving the ocean. The ocean acidification is probably the biggest ocean threat. And we assessed it in terms of it's hard to visualize, and it's a more complicated thing to explain. And we were wanting to keep this story relatively straightforward and simple. And our view also was, if we address the ocean warming problem around fossil fuel emissions that is warming the ocean, if we address that, we also, by benefit, also address the acidification problem. Acidification, the bleaching and the warming of the ocean will kill coral reefs before acidification gets the chance to kill coral reefs. But acidification, the big threat there is that it's killing phytoplankton potentially, which produces most of our oxygen. So there's a huge, huge red flag. Like, I've got all sorts of bad stories I can bring you guys. But our ocean's oxygen production, which makes half to 2/3 of the oxygen that we breathe, is under threat. Like, in my lifetime, it's under threat. So picture a forest, like on Staten Island, for example, and if they all get clear cut, like imagine all the trees just got chopped down, right? You will still have trees, babies that will come up and sprout, but it'll take a long time for those trees to get to full maturity. We were diving on corals that were hundreds of years old, thousands of years old. It'll take hundreds and hundreds of years for those corals to grow back. So they're not going to recover to its full state anytime soon. You'll get the shrubs, like the equivalents of shrubs, like the rapid growing corals. They'll come back first. And within about a decade, it'll look like a functioning healthy reef. You'll see decent fish populations. So coral reefs can grow back. It's dependent on a bunch of factors. You need certain types of fish that can keep the surface and the topography clean enough so that the coral seeds can actually grab a hold and plant and grow from that. But the concern there, we actually didn't, we debated whether or not we should go deep into this notion of coral restoration, because if the ocean just continues to warm as it is projected to, yeah, coral reef can come back in 10 years, and then the next El Nino or the next heat wave that comes is just going to wipe it out again. and it's very different. It's not like it's being manually touched by humans that's destroying it. It's just this hot water problem. So they can grow back. They do grow back. They will. We've actually been debating if we should set up some of our cameras to document the recovery efforts and to watch a reef grow back. We've got the equipment. We know how to do it. And so that's one of the big challenges there. Thank you guys all so much. It's a thrill to be here. Thanks for sticking around.
The Orlowski family should be very proud. Thank you to Jeff, and thank you for coming.